Eric, very glad to be here.
It's great for you to come on, and there's a couple things that I want to talk to you about because being that you came on and you were telling me before the podcast that you used to pastor, but you don't do that anymore. But you are an author. You're currently have a book out, or is it coming out, or is it already out?
I have, I mean, I've published a lot of books. My 13th book releases in middle of March.
Right, your most recent book, and
Yeah,
and I like having different perspectives, being that I'm not a religious podcast, but I like having diverse conversations with a diverse pool of subjects. So
good.
take me from the top. As a non religious person, take me from the top as to, let's begin, what got you into writing the books in that
Hmm.
subject?
Yeah, are we focusing on the book God Walk? Because I have 13 books, so I got to narrow it
Yeah.
down. Or do you want me to talk broadly about my writing interests?
So take me from
But
just what
which
got
one do you
you
want
into
to?
it, so I have a better understanding of how you came from getting in started
Okay,
in writing to how you are writing
okay,
now.
got it. Go, thanks, Eric. Yeah, that's let me try to sort of cast that big scenario. But I was a really bad student, actually, like bad in
Hmm.
terms of performed poorly academically, and really had very low motivation. And so I squeaked through. I got basically C's, occasionally a C plus. Once in a while, I'd get a B.
Hmm.
Then my parents would take me out to pizza. So they didn't have aspirations for me academically either.
Hmm.
And so I had no motivation or sort of sense of I'm good at anything when it comes to writing and arithmetic and all that.
Right.
And I'd never intended to go beyond high school. I squeaked through high school, graduated, was going to get a labor job and live blissfully after that. But I had a grade five teacher who I really credit with waking up something more in me. And he had me keep a journal and then really pushed me to do creative writing, not just kind of,
Hmm.
keeping a chronicle of what I ate for breakfast and whatnot. And it just some magic in language and story kind of got into me, and I wasn't a good practitioner, but I had a vision of what
Mm.
somebody, if I developed a skill, what could be done with just words. And
Hmm.
so that woke up when I was in grade five. It was a difficult after that, the kind of teachers I had tended to put me to sleep again. But when I was 18 and had graduated, I began to explore short story form, fiction short story form, and kind of loved the magic of it again. I fell in love with the this sense that you could simply string four or five words together and it would do something in the imagination
Hmm.
of your listener, that they were picturing something with you. That that was, the best word I've used it already is magic. That you
Mm.
could put something in somebody's head that started their own fever dream just by putting three or four or eight words together. So that began it, and I just started working the craft. Like nobody was
Hmm.
reading it, nobody wanted it, nobody would publish it. I wasn't even trying to publish,
Yeah.
just working the craft. And finally, I decided I need to go back to I need to go back to school. I wanted to get a bachelor degree. And long story short, I ended up in the creative writing program at University of British Columbia, which is a pretty prestigious program. They only took about 20 students a year. Most of the students who graduate from that have gone on to win prestigious awards and have a illustrious publishing career.
Hmm.
Because they hammer you. It was like whiplash. My goodness, they really work you over.
Hmm.
But it was that experience that kind of having a desire to write and then cultivating at least some basic skills around it during this period when I was exploring short story form, and then getting accepted into the creative writing program where it was like boot camp. It was like training to be a Navy SEAL of writing or something. That catapulted me into not where suddenly I was all fame and fortune, but where I had something to say, and I had a pretty decent proficiency at saying it.
Wow. So now you're on your 13th book, and it started
Yeah.
from not really knowing what to do or what direction to take to now having your 13th book coming out.
Yeah. Yeah, crazy. And that journey, like, really began. So I didn't have my first book. I'm 65, Eric. My
Yeah.
first book didn't come out until I was 40. Now I was
Wow.
publishing probably from I got some publishing done in my 20s, but it was really through my 30s. I
Hmm.
was building up a fairly significant body of published work, but it was small stuff, and it paid very little. Or normally in those days, they'd just give you like 5 copies of the magazine or something.
Hmm.
But probably by the time my first book came out, I'd probably published maybe 40 to 50 pieces of writing. Nobody was noticing until I actually started publishing in bigger magazines, and then they did. So here's this: I didn't get my first book in print. I think I was 41 when it came out,
Wow.
and I'm 65, so it's just been a little over 20 years I've had a book publishing, but 13th book, so you can see do the math on this. I've basically published a book every 2 years since then.
Wow. Yeah, because there's a lot of people in that position that they're putting all of their effort into something and they're seeing no traction and they just give up before they're able to get to that first goal, and it just goes up from there, right?
Yeah, I mean, really, I mean, yeah, there's the old saying, you're an overnight success, 20 years in the making or something. Like,
Yeah.
there is, I remember when I'm Canadian. I remember in Canada a few years ago at the Winter Olympics in Beijing, won, or maybe it was summer, no, sorry, Summer Olympics. They won some big rowing contest and came in gold, and they kind of beat out everybody by a significant distance. And the captain of the team
Yeah.
said that gold medals are won in the summer, but they're actually or they're granted in the summer, but they're won in the winter. And what he meant
Hmm.
is that they were out every day in the most miserable weather. They were in Victoria, which is fairly mild climate, but it's still lots of rain and cold and damp, and every day they're out there for hours in that awful weather,
Hmm.
working their oars, working their craft, and then suddenly, then they're standing on a podium and getting gold medals around their neck. And I that to me was a real also, transposed over into writing that
Hmm.
like like if you're going to have success, not just a one-off, but where you can, people keep wanting to publish you. I think that that's a very, very deep, lonely apprenticeship where you're just
Yeah.
working your craft and also submitting it to sometimes some pretty fierce criticism. Like you've got to get thick skin because if you really want to grow, you have to not just send it to people who are going to, you know, lavish praise on you and tell you you're brilliant, but people who tell you where it's really weak and
Hmm.
not be offended by that.
Yeah, especially when you're writing books and there are people that are dedicate themselves to criticizing books,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah, yeah, and I mean, it's interesting because I mean, sometimes the self-appointed critic is just a crank, right? And we can sort of I got good advice years ago to not count criticism but weigh it. Is this person credible? Is this person themselves
Hmm.
know much about the thing that they sort of appoint themselves as an authority on, etc.? Is this somebody you trust? Is this somebody who's been, not doesn't have a critical spirit? They've generally been kind to you, and now they're saying, "Hey, you could do better." So
Right.
all those things. but I do, one of the things I've been doing over the last 10 years is leading writing retreats where I just open it up to a group of writers or aspiring writers for a week. We go to some beautiful place, have great food, some nice wine, and I coach them in writing. And then we have, lovely evenings where people read what they're working on. But I am very, in the context of the group, I am very encouraging. Like I will not, tear apart a person's piece of writing in front of
Hmm.
others. I will find that two or three things that are brilliant, and I will say that they're brilliant and why they're brilliant. When I meet with those writers one on one, I don't become cruel, but I become much more critical in the root sense that I'm going to actually show them where it's not working and why it's not working.
Mm.
And that to me, it's interesting. When I do these retreats, I usually reserve about 8 spots where people can sign up for a bit extra money and get this one-on-one sessions with me. Over the 10 or so years I've done these retreats, I think all but two of the aspiring writers who have taken that extra session have gone on to publish books because that's the stuff that really grows you as a writer.
Mm.
Somebody who will, with kindness but without flinching, will say, "This isn't working, and I'll show you why." And if you
Yeah.
will attend to that, now, any aspiring writers or artists or, you know, people are doing some other form of the creative work, uh, just not only welcome that kind of feedback, but go and actually seek it out.
Yeah. Yeah. So now take me to your most recent book, and what's the title of it? It's
Yeah, the one that's coming out in a couple of weeks is called What Is Left of the Night. And
okay.
it's a
Yeah. Right.
novel. So I go back and forth between sort of nonfiction and fiction. So it's a novel based on a true story or true events, like like
Right.
how Netflix described based on true events. There's a little village in southeastern France that during the war mobilized to rescue refugees, mostly Jewish people, mostly Jewish children. And historically, the number has been estimated as high as 8,000. That probably isn't accurate, but
Mhm.
it's been demonstrated beyond doubt that at least 2,500 refugees, mostly Jewish children, were rescued by this little village of 900 people.
Mhm.
I have had a long fascination with this. I was actually living in that village when COVID hit and
Yeah.
had to vacate back to Canada. But I've been several times to the village, gone through the archives, etc., interviewed survivors, and finally I wrote it up as a novel for a number of reasons. But it's a big whopper, 400-page novel. And what is left of the night, by the way, is a line out of Isaiah, I think chapter 26, the book of Isaiah in the Bible.
Mhm.
And it's a time of great trouble and peril, and the Assyrians are wreaking havoc in Israel. And an imaginary person asks the watchman, "What is left of the night? How much more do we have to put up with here?" And the watchman answers, "Night is almost over, day is coming, but there will be no night." And so I pull that title to talk about this little village doing this heroic work, but they actually were very imperiled, and increasingly the Vichy regime and then the Nazis, as they took over full occupation of the south of France, began to sort of target this little village because they began to discover what they were doing. And so I've taken those sort of, bare bones facts and some of the main characters, historical characters that were central to this story, and written it up as a novel. And just kind of added, those cranked up the plot a little bit to make it more dramatic. Not that it isn't dramatic enough.
So when it comes to that book, is there a centered figure, like the
Oh yeah,
protagonist?
yeah. Yeah, absolutely. The central figure is an actual historical person, a pastor by the name of André Trocmé, and his wife Magda. They were really partners in this heroic effort, and so he kind of centers the book, and any sort of the action more or less has to circle back to him or emanate from him. Is one of the things you do when you get a protagonist is everybody's waiting for that central character to
Yeah.
show up or to figure out what is this subplot going to have to do with the so and so the
Hmm.
central person. So they govern the large arc of a story. That's how basic novel plotting works. That the central character,
Hmm.
the big arc is tied to them. Subplots don't have to be explicitly tied to them, but they have to advance the big arc of the story.
Yeah.
So that's what I've done. But there's hardly out of the 400 pages of that book, I bet you 300 have something to do with Trocmé or the Trocmés.
Yeah. And so, what's the process of when it comes to choosing who the protagonist is going to be? Because this is a fiction book, right? So there is a
Yeah,
lot.
that's right. Yeah.
So,
Yeah. Oh, shoot. That's such a big question. You have more, you're about to say something and I interrupted you because maybe you could say more and that would help me navigate this question.
well, I mean, go ahead because I was just going to ask when it comes to choosing who the protagonist is, where do you pull influences from to really craft this character?
Yeah. So the first question, how do you pick the central character? And when you're doing historical novels, as this is, uh, there's several options to be honest around that. And one of them is a fictional character I simply make up, but she's a composite of a number of historical personages. I call her Hannah, and she's a Jewish refugee, an escapee from a death train or a train going to a death camp. And so she ends up in the village, and so she becomes sort of the dynamic of that whole, what is the deep concern of Trocme in this village concerning these imperiled people, and so she becomes a focal point. And there's times I would imagine readers reading the book will wonder if Trocme or Hannah is a protagonist, because I think she's a very compelling character and quite sharp, and in a sense, both sort of grateful for the help that this village and family are providing, but also critical of their faith and whatnot, or trying to understand it, but not really understanding it. And so she becomes a bit of a foil, not an anti-hero or anything, but a
Right.
bit of a foil to the Troc maze. And so she takes up a lot of space in the
Hmm.
book as well. And really, I think enlivens. I think without someone like Ahana, this book would have been quite flat. But so I think what I do, what I did, what the process of deciding Trachme is, first of all, historically, he figures just very large in the accounts of what happened in this village at this time. You can't read a book about Le Chambon, the little village, and not within a few pages hit the name Trocme.
Right.
And there's historical debate how important he was to the rescue efforts, but generally most historians say, yeah, without him it wouldn't have happened. So it was pretty easy picking him. Plus, he's a bigger than life character. Like, he's physically large, but super interesting. So super, whenever you're creating, looking for either the protagonist or antagonist, the villain, you look for complication. Are these
Hmm.
people, merely two-dimensional? Are they like, is Trachme pure virtue? And the answer is no. He had his issues. And so that's just gold for a novelist, that somebody who has moral complexity, relational complexity, emotional complexity, that's the stuff you want. And so he just kind of presented himself like, pick me, pick me.
Right.
So that wasn't too hard. to find. There's a second question. I've already lost it. By the way, I can talk ad nauseum, so
Yeah,
interrupt me at any point.
go ahead. Yeah, but
No, but you had a second question related to the protagonist.
or where do you pull influences from? Like, how do you use influences?
Oh, the influences.
Yeah.
Like you mean like other writers or um
So
like what? Give me a bit more to understand the question.
So when crafting a character, you also have to pull
Yeah.
influences from either personal experiences or
Oh,
stories
oh,
that
oh.
you've read.
Yeah. Oh, so such a great question, Eric. Yeah, I mean, I think for novelists, this book, What Is Left of the Night, is my fourth novel, and I think it's inevitable and inescapable that even if you're writing about, if even if your main character is an historical figure,
Hmm.
how do you understand the motivations of that character? How do you understand, or try to get it under their skin in any situation where they're feeling fear or joy or lust or whatever? Some of your own, your own story, some of it's going to be autobiographical because
Right.
in the end, we mostly understand human motivation and human experience through our own lens of what would it be like for me. Obviously, we have to push ourselves beyond that, but I think that's an inevitable part. So, absolutely, there's parts of every character, but May,
Yeah.
as a protagonist in this book, absolutely. He was a pastor. I pastored for many years.
Hmm.
I had to sort of enter back imaginatively into that space and not and experientially. I had to go relive what would it be like for me if thus and sort of try to understand what Trachme actually did or what he might have done or been thinking given what I might have done in that situation. So
Uh-huh.
autobiography is, I don't think you can avoid it. But the other thing is Trachme is an historical figure, and there's biographies of him, there's histories of the events around this village. So I had to soak myself in those and really try to get a sense of the man independent of my own thoughts about him whatever
Right.
what it was his character like and you use all these various sources including
Hmm.
his own sermons. We have transcripts of his own sermons, his own memoirs he wrote. So all of this is rich material to try to figure this guy out.
Yeah.
I'll give you a quick example. Trocmé, he was quite rigorous, morally rigorous, and especially around his sexuality. He really, wanted to be very guarded and never
Hmm.
screw up and all of that. But he felt a powerful attraction toward women. And so, I mean, that's part of that complexity of character, right?
Yeah.
Um, but some of the ways he would sort of kind of create uh, you know, impose on himself some constraints around being with women, looking at women and whatnot, are kind of
Mm.
puritanical.
Mm.
Probably good. You see how many sort of high ranking pastors fall
Right.
into sexual immorality, and it was probably really wise. But he was quite rigorous with himself. But it
Hmm.
wasn't so much out of uh, he it wasn't this sort of huge kind of foundation of virtue, but just his understanding of his own human frailty and weakness, and putting around himself the kind of barricades or guardrails that he wouldn't mess up. So those sort of things. I mean, he was quite emotionally volatile.
Uh-huh.
So this man who's doing this great work, beautiful work, also had a temper.
Right.
So those sorts of things you just have to be aware of, note. Some of them again, I interpret through my own experience. Other things, it's like one thing I never really got about Trachme. is he was a pure, I mean, as pure a pacifist
Hmm.
as you can find on the planet. So he didn't believe in war, but he didn't believe in personal violence in any way. So,
Hmm.
uh, you know, I think the classic ethics case, if somebody was holding your family at gunpoint and you had a gun and you could just take out the bad guy, would you do it?
Mm.
You know, most people on the planet would say, yes, I would.
Right.
Trockmay, it's unclear that he would. Like he was such a
Yeah.
pacifist.
Wow.
And to be honest, there's parts of me that just could never quite comprehend how sort of pure and how fierce that conviction was in him.
Yeah. Yeah. Because when it comes to writing about historical events, you like to keep it as, or I would imagine you would like to keep it as historical accurate because you cannot just make up facts. But from when it comes down to every person, there's still something that people might not know about that person, which gives authors the liberty to fill in the facts or fill in how they may have felt at that time. And that's where things could shift a little. You know, one thing that I think about is, former President Buchanan, who is known to have been a bachelor. And there's some people that think that he might have just been gay because he was, from what I've heard, I think he was the only U.S. president that was never married. So some people like to fill in the blank, like maybe the guy, he was just gay. So when talking about
Right.
historical events and not knowing piece of fact, it gives people the liberty to fill in the facts with their own thoughts or with their own experiences. Do you ever feel that you come across certain situations like that? Because you even said that you can't comprehend how someone could be that good.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, for sure. That's I've actually read. You're not going to believe it. A short biography of Buchanan. He's one of the least known presidents and considered one of the most ineffective. And and partly he's who follows him, but Lincoln.
Hmm.
So and many say that his Buchanan's fumbling, indecisiveness and whatnot brought about the American Civil War.
Hmm.
Uh, but I didn't know that. I actually didn't know it was probably in the biography I read, but it was many years ago
Yeah.
that he was single, and I didn't know about the speculations about him. But I think that's a great illustration, Eric, that there's this lacunae, these gaps
Yeah.
in any story, any historical story where we don't know, and probably humility would require us to sort of stay mute, but curiosity draws us in to speculate at least. And I think that if we sort of at least are aware that we're speculating, this is guesswork, then we can handle that with a certain amount of integrity. But when it comes to a novel, it's more tricky. Like if I was writing a historical piece on Throckmey,
Hmm.
I might, step back and speculate and let the author or the reader know, hey, I'm wondering, I'm speculating, I'm guessing, about this and that about his character. When you write a novel, you have to kind of present yourself with great confidence. You have to kind of make claims that
Yeah.
may not be historically true. And so, I mean, my other three novels are on the life of the biblical character David.
Hmm.
And that was very interesting. And also higher stakes because there's a whole bunch of readers who, if you take too many liberties with a biblical story, they're going to come running at you. They're going to say, you made this up, or on what basis have you made such a claim, or whatever. And I
Hmm.
decided to take that risk anyhow because there's so many things in the Davis story that we just wonder, how do you get from here to here? Did he seem to be this person? when he was this age, and 10 years
Uh-huh.
later, he seems completely different. What happened in between? So, an author is going to be curious about that and then speculate about that, but the writing actually is going to present it as fact if it's a novel, not as guesswork. So with Trocme, that was a problem too, because we don't have that much on him.
Hmm.
I mean, we have a fair amount, but not so much. So I have several conversations fully imagined about why, where he's talking to people, and it's um he's coming to some earlier in his life, some kind of conviction about his pacifism. That stuff actually was well historically documented. For a lot of that, I could rely on historical sources. But later on, when he's fully in the grip of this pacifism, and at that point it's full on war. When he's developing his
Hmm.
pacifistic convictions, it's we're not in wartime, it's peacetime. Then the rise of the Reich, and then the invasion of France and the occupation of France, and da da da, and now we're in full on war, and this is where his pacifism is tested, and it proves he's not going to flinch. He's going to hold on to that. But we don't know much about how that looked and what that sounded like in real time.
Right.
So I invent conversations where he's talking with people who don't agree with him. One of them
Yeah.
is a young guy in his completely invented, a young guy in his church, what's called a maquisard, the resistance fighter. So he wants to join the resistance, French resistance, and basically comes to Trocme, this pastor, to get a blessing. Trocme won't give it to him,
Uh-huh.
but it's a perfect opportunity that I invented to have a
Yeah.
conversation about these very differing ideologies around war.
Hmm. Yeah, and that's another thing when it comes down to even writing or reading autobiographies. And in autobiographies, they like to have conversations between two people that have since passed, and people just wonder like, how do they even know what was said in the room if those two people are already
Yeah,
dead?
they don't.
And
They make it up. Yeah, they
yeah,
make it up. I mean, the idea that somehow all history or biography or autobiography is the way it happened is. I mean, Eric, if
yeah,
you and I were reporting on a conversation we had 2 months ago with somebody, we would have an imperfect recollection of that.
yeah.
And if somebody had recorded it secretly and played that over against or alongside of our reportage of that event, what was said, why,
Hmm.
what I was doing, there would be very little resemblance, other than there would be probably some core of truth,
Right.
but that's the imperfection of memory. That is that most of our recollections and most of our retellings of what we recall have a bit of a self-justifying element to it.
Right.
Even if we sort of tell them in humility, we're usually trying to make ourselves look a little better than we might have been. So all that is already plaguing any honest attempt to just get this, the facts straight of
Uh-huh.
an actual historical episode. So, in a sense, all biography, all history, and
Hmm.
all autobiography has this element of fiction to it.
Yeah.
And it by nature, like nobody wants to read your autobiography when you're talking about meeting and talking with so and so, and you to constantly be qualifying it with I don't
Hmm.
remember, I don't know, he said, I don't remember what he said. Like at some point your reader will just put that down, so you
Hmm.
kind of have to, you have to kind of brazen it out and say so and so said this and they retorted that, and then we walked over, to the edge of the pool, and all of that may or may not be historically accurate. But
Hmm.
what you're honestly trying to get at in any story, whether it's historical or not, is there a sort of fundamental core of truth here? Um,
Right.
is the meaning of this true? Not are necessarily the details of this all true?
Right. Especially when it comes down to writing an autobiography about a family that's very secretive, or at least protects their reputation at all costs. And you're trying to
Yeah,
write about even the negatives that came out of them. Like, for
right.
example.
Yeah, the tricky stuff. I mean, the Truckmans have a couple living children. One who I've been in contact with
Hmm.
through the last several years as they've been developing this. And so I was always conscious that, here's somebody who uh, lived through it, lived through these
Hmm.
events, was a participant in it, has their own memories that are going to be more accurate than mine, though, as I already said about memory that's faulty, even in the best of us. But really wanting to honor the living
Hmm.
um, progeny of the Trachmaes without making it into what's called hagiography, the life
Hmm.
of the saints sort of thing.
Yeah.
Um, these are people like any of us who are full of contradictions, have this emotional and et cetera complexity, motivational complexity, and try to be real about that, even if sometimes I'm guessing
Hmm.
around that. So those are just tricky things. And it's just tricky, I think, in any writing, but certainly when you touch on historical fiction, especially historical
Hmm.
fiction of somebody where there's still folks who are alive who live through these events and have their own clear memories of them.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's to the credit, my publisher. I mean, they were rigorous in making sure that
Hmm.
anything that I, was, in a sense made a claim of that I could document it, or the forward to this new book,
Hmm.
What Is Left of the Night. I mean, it's about a 3-page forward, which is pretty long in my
Hmm.
estimation of a forward, where partly I'm just justifying my methodology, why I took liberties, where I took liberties, those sorts of things.
Hmm. Yeah.
Just because I don't want anybody reading this book as this is a history. I want them to read it. This is a novel that's,
Mhm.
you know, based on some historical events.
Yeah, because when you read any type of literature, you could clearly see if it's biased in any direction. And that's like the last thing you want
Yeah,
when depicting historical events, right?
yeah.
And
Yeah, I mean, or you want to fess up to your biases because I don't know
mhm,
if writing anything absolutely free of bias
mhm,
is humanly possible.
yeah,
I think you have to sort of be, examining and saying, am I, trying to make a case for something? And
mhm,
that's my secret hidden agenda. And just
yeah,
be honest with yourself, but also just be honest with a reader. Hey, I really
mhm,
care about this and such. And in this book, I was deliberately kind of looking for this or whatnot, so that at the very least, as an author, you've signaled to the reader, hey,
mhm.
if you're picking up this bias, good for you, because I do have it or whatever.
Right. So
I
you,
mean, it's interesting. I try to read it on all sides,
yeah,
of the political divides, just so that especially if it's coming to me through social media or something, I'm
yeah,
not going to get gamed by or by the algorithms. But also because the bias is so
mhm,
clear on all sides. But if there's a pretense that we're writing objectively or presenting objectively, that's where we fall in. That's where we sort of fall
mhm,
down the rabbit hole. So
yeah.
I just try to sort of get as balanced a view as I can. I think. Sorry, I interrupted you.
No, but you do make a great point. There because there is a difference between having a bias and just having a hidden agenda. Because with a hidden agenda, you are aware of your biases, but you try to paint a certain picture just because you want to push a certain agenda.
Totally. And if it's hidden, it's either deceitful if you're hiding it from your reader or listener, or is self-deceiving. Because if you
Hmm.
don't think you have one, then you're in a sense in the thrall, you're in the grip of that bias and writing out of it. And honestly, I think that's where people, especially who just kind of get their news from one source,
Hmm.
they are unaware that their perspective is profoundly biased, and so they're in a sense slaves to the bias.
Right.
So, so I would say there's those levels, a hidden bias where I totally know what my bias is, but I'm going to pretend that it's not there and try to dupe you,
Hmm.
or I'm so deep down the rabbit hole that I actually think that I'm the one person who knows and sees the truth, and anyone who isn't is an idiot, and I will, correct you. I mean,
Hmm.
now we're sort of venturing into the political landscape, but that's basically kind of the problem that's
Yeah.
afflicted, massive parts of the world population.
Yeah. Yeah. No, because when it comes to politics, that's where we clearly see biases happen. So it's probably why many people use that as an example, because with any other part of life, we are not really able to depict what the biases are. But when it comes to politics, it's basically black and white. There's two sides that are split down the middle. So
Yeah,
it's where we could clearly provide examples of true biases happening. And you also mentioned
yeah,
social
yeah.
media. Like everyone's is a walking algorithm. So even when you listen to podcasts, all the podcast hosts, even though they may be independent, I guess
Yeah.
journalists, if you want to call it that, they're all
Yeah.
influenced by their own social media feed. So where is all that information coming from? And it makes them think that there is just one side of facts or this one world view, which may not be necessarily accurate.
Yeah, indeed, that's well said. Yeah, and that's why I think, all of us only have so much time and energy, and we need to actually go for walks in the woods and sort
Yeah.
of see, reality on a pretty regular basis, and orient ourselves to that and scale everything to that. But at the same time, if we're gonna wade in on anything, but we're talking about politics, and
Yeah.
that's the most volatile and vexed right now. We really owe it to ourselves and the people that we have influence over to just be a little more thoughtful,
Hmm.
mindful, slow to jump to conclusions, willing to hear out good, thoughtful arguments from all sides.
Hmm.
Not the ranting, the strident ranting. That's just kind of that's not helpful anywhere in
Yeah.
any context. But just really thoughtful, measured, sort of wondering out loud, looking at things in a larger historical, cultural context.
Hmm.
I really like, for instance, any political podcast
Yeah.
that kind of thinks it through in the arc of, the
Hmm.
long arc of especially Western political
Hmm.
theory, so
Yeah.
that we're sort of placing whatever's happening now in some much larger context and getting our bearings from that. So et cetera, et cetera. That's just, I think, I mean, I think that's where, where we can overcome some of these biases that are actually
Hmm.
going to, turn us into nasty and potentially violent people.
Yeah. But for some reason, humans just love violence, and that's why violent sports are just so successful. Like people have a
Yeah,
constant
why?
hunger
I
for
mean,
it.
yeah, it's crazy. What was that you said, Eric? People have a what?
People have a constant hunger for like violence, even if it could be
Yeah,
sports,
I mean the
politics, anything.
movies, yeah, sports. But it's theatrical, right? So
Yeah.
there's a sense, and there's a fairly good sort of psychological and sociological argument that if we have, like, bloodfest sports, whether they're things like hockey where fights break out, or they're actually fights, or cage fighting or boxing matches or whatever, people bleed and they get cut and they fall down. Um, is that purgative? Is that cathartic? Is that sort of we ceremonialize the violence
Hmm.
and therefore don't have to participate in it ourselves. And arguments go back and forth that are
Yeah.
these things actually inflaming our own tendencies to violence, or are they, in a sense, quieting or satisfying that violent thing? I saw Denzel Washington kill a
Hmm.
whole bunch of people on a train, and that was really gratifying because they're all bad people and they need to be eliminated. There was no light in them at all, and so Denzel took care of that. Thank God, thank God. I don't have to now because Denzel's out there on trains doing this. Like,
Hmm.
I don't know, but I think that it is extraordinary, not just the the way sports increasingly probably have taken a violent turn,
Hmm.
or returned to it. I mean, we're back to gladiatorial things almost, or and movies like it's just extraordinary how many vengeance movies are out there, how
Yeah.
popular they are, and how anybody who actually lived through one episode of the violence of just depicted every 5 minutes in one of these vengeance movies. If we just lived through one of those episodes, we
Hmm.
would have levels of trauma that would take years to work through. And yet
Right.
we can consume that stuff and feel pretty good and sleep well. I
Hmm.
don't know. I mean, we're into a different conversation now, but I do think that you know the human well, there's this quote in the prophet Jeremiah in the Bible that uh, the heart is deceitful above all things and desperately wicked. Who can
Hmm.
know it? And
Yeah.
sometimes that does seem to be my own heart.
Yeah, and I think that's a fascinating spot to end this with and end this conversation with. But I mean, this has been a really interesting conversation because not only did we talk about like your book, but also like the influences that come down to writing your book and where you pulled those influences from. But
Yeah, thanks. Thanks for the interview. Thanks for letting this sort of take its own shape, and we kind of went where it took we went where it took us.
right, yeah. Well, thank you for coming on, and I hope we carry the conversation another time.
Yeah, I'd love that. Thanks, Eric.
All right, thank you.